All right, here we are, South Beach Gospel Ministries. We are here at the annual Memorial Day on South Beach Air and Sea Show. You're going to have the United States Air Force here in a little bit, B-2 bombers, jet fighters, and all that. So we're going to get the message in before all the noise happens. This time last year, we were looking at a question: is America in Bible prophecy? Today, in honor of our annual Memorial Day message, usually related to something about America, we used to call it Once Upon a Time in America, and look at Americans' Christian roots. Today we're going to be discussing the question of the Babylonian reference in the book of Revelation. Is the United States the Babylon of Scripture? Is America Babylon? It will be interesting to look at the different views. Some people say Mystery Babylon is a religious system. Some people say it's a literal state. In fact, the city of Babylon, where the Tower of Babel was, is actually in Iraq on the Euphrates River, and it's been rebuilt over the years. Some people say that's the Babylon referred to in Revelation 18, but then there are other people like Dave Hunt in his excellent book that we've looked at in times past, A Woman Rides the Beast, makes the argument that because Rome was built on 7 hills, and Revelation 17 talks about the purple being scarlet and purple, which is the color of the Catholic Church. My Catholic friends invited me to their services over this past Resurrection, Passover, Easter week, and I got a chance to see these guys in action in their purple and scarlet with silver and gold inside their Catholic cathedrals. And so Dave Hunt makes an excellent point that Revelation 17 can't be talking about the city of Babylon in Iraq, but it must be talking about a religious system that dates all the way back to the Tower of Babel and before. And so we're going to look at those positions. We're going to look at Chuck Missler and Joe Chambers, the pastor in North Carolina, who's written a book suggesting that it's the Babylon in Iraq, that's the rebuilt city, that is referred to in Revelation 18. Dave Hunt, of course, says Revelation 17 is the Roman Catholic Church and a religious mystery Babylon system, and therefore is not the city in Iraq. And then Chuck Missler takes a position that'll be interesting, as he did a debate with Dave Hunt a few years back relating to the Babylon in the Bible. And so we're going to be looking at those things. We're going to start out in the book of Revelation, look at those passages from Revelation 17 and 18, and then we're going to do a quick trip through the Bible, going all the way back to where Mystery Babylon and Babylon in and of itself actually began. And that is all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. And let's go ahead and start out by taking a look in Scripture. We're going to go ahead and jump in Revelation chapter 18 and 17. That's where we're going to start up, and then we'll finish up, and at the very end, I'll give you my position on whether or not the United States is the Babylon of the Bible, or whether Mystery Babylon of the Bible is the rebuilt city of Iraq, or whether Mystery Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church. Remember, in his legendary book, the Reverend Alexander Hislop wrote about 100 years before Dave Hunt. He takes Dave Hunt's position, or Dave Hunt took his position. Both of these guys say that Babylon relates to the Catholic Church. Hislop said, ancient Babylon, yeah, it was a real thing, but there's another Babylon. That other Babylon is the Catholic Church. So you'll see at the very end what my position is, and I want you guys to put in the comments whether or not you believe America is the Babylon of Revelation chapter 17 and 18, and why. And if not, what is Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18? Is it Iraq? Is it the Catholic Church? Is it something else? So let's go ahead and take a look. Go ahead and jump in there. And we start out by looking at that passage that Dave Hunt wrote about, Revelation 17, and it says, "And there came one of the 7 angels, and he had the 7 vials, and he talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters." Now, again, that is an interesting comment, and it goes on in verse 2. It says, "With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Now, Dave Hunt says only the Catholic Church has been historically broad-spanned enough to be able to fulfill all of those characteristics. The nations of the earth have been influenced, the kings of the earth have been influenced by the Roman church system, and so he makes that point that it has to be the Catholic Church. But then when we jump along, another point that he makes out in verse 3, he says, so he carried me away in the spirit. Remember, John has been raptured up into heaven. He's getting a view of the 70th week of Daniel. He's seeing the prophetic last 7 years of human history, and the angel is showing him things that will occur during this final 7-year period of time known as the 70th week of Daniel. And in verse 3 it says, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having the 7 heads and 10 horns. And that's where Dave Hunt gets his title for his book. A woman rides the beast. A woman is on top of this beast. And he says that the woman is the Mystery Babylon goddess worship system that really continues on to this day in the Roman Catholic Church system, with the worship of the Virgin Mary being used, or using the Antichrist system to unite the world together in a one world false pseudo-Christian religion. And that's what he argues. And then he says in verse 3, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, and having a golden cup in her hand, full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And Dave Hunt says, you go in any Catholic church, and I experienced that myself this past Passover, Easter, Resurrection Sunday weekend. When I went to those services, there were silver and gold chalices everywhere. Man, I mean, it was real solid gold. I mean, it wasn't fake. And so he does make a point that the Catholic Church makes a good candidate for Revelation chapter 17. Verse 5 says this, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So we find out then that Mystery Babylon is referred to as a she, and that she is the mother of all harlots, meaning false religions. Babylonian paganism relates itself all the way back, dates itself all the way back to the fall in the garden, and then reiterated again after the flood of Noah in what? The Tower of Babel, where Nimrod and Semiramis became the first, sun god and female sky goddess, queen of heaven figures in the new world, the post-flood world. And that continued on in many different iterations throughout Egypt, throughout the Roman Empire, throughout the Grecian culture, all the way up to the present day. And when the Romans adopted it, and when Constantine converted to Christianity supposedly in 325 AD, they put that Babylonian paganism right into the Roman church system, and that gave us what we have today called the Roman Catholic, or Catholic means universal, the Roman Catholic Universal Church. And so Hunt makes that excellent point right there. And so he says, and I saw the woman, in verse 6, I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Who, Dave Hunt asks, has martyred more Christians than the Roman church system? During the Crusades, during the Inquisitions, when the persecution of the Valdenses, the Huguenots, the Hussites, all of these individuals were biblical Christians who refused to participate in the Roman church system because of the Babylonian paganism steeped within. And as a result, they were slaughtered. The slaughter of Christians in Baeza, the fleeing of Christians into the mountains in Switzerland and southern France to escape the persecution of the Roman church system that required that you put the Pope and the Virgin Mary at the top of your worship pedestal, and biblical Christians couldn't do that. So Hunt makes the point that, well, it's got to be talking about the Catholic Church, because nobody else, no other pseudo-Christian system has persecuted believers around the world like the Roman Catholic Church. And so we bounce on a little bit further, and when we get to Revelation chapter 18, we see yet another reference to Babylon. And so again, the question then is, what is this Babylon that's being referred to? Clearly, it's a mystery system from Revelation 17. But then when we get to Revelation 18, it talks about a physical geographical location. And so we pick it up. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 1, it says, and after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. So John again is seeing the last days of the 70th week of Daniel, that 7-year tribulation and great tribulation period. He's experiencing these things. And so he says, and the angel cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a habitation of devils, and a hold for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And so again, is that talking metaphorically about a religious system that has influenced the kings of the earth? You can make that argument right there. And then in verse 7 it says this, how much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, talking about this mystery Babylon, who is referred to as a sort of female deity goddess system. And it says, she glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. And American Freemasonry and worldwide Freemasonry actually uses that very language. You know, we're going to do a teaching in the future on Freemasonry and how it relates to pseudo-spirituality and even Satanism. And in Freemasonry, they have this legend about the widow's son. The widow has lost her son and she mourns for him. But this clearly is making a reference to that. Why? Because her son has come back. In Freemasonic sort of religion, it makes the argument that the son of the widow is going to come back to the earth and is going to worship on the earth and rule on the earth. And that person is going to be what we call the Antichrist. And so when Antichrist comes, that in Freemasonic mythology is the resurrection of the slain Nimrod, who comes back to life in the form of his son. Remember, Tammuz was supposedly the resurrected, dying and sun god king's, virgin-born God-man son. Tammuz is the widow's son. And when he rules upon the earth, some people, the Grecians called him Apollo, the Freemasons call him the widow's son. Is that being referred to here in Revelation chapter 18 when she says, I sit a queen, I am no widow? Why? Because her formerly dead husband has come back again to life in the form of her resurrected, deified son, which is, again, Freemasonic mythology. And then it goes on to say, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, and this is Revelation 18:8, and death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burnt with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. And so God is going to bring judgment upon this Babylonian system in Revelation chapter 18, and he's going to use the Antichrist system to do it. And it says this, verse 9, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her. And when they shall see her smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour her judgment has come. And so it's this sort of imagery in Revelation 18 that gave people a lot of arguments after the World Trade Center, 9/11. Remember, September 11th of 2001, I lived in New York City, and I was a prosecutor there for, more than 10 years before I came down here to be a prosecutor. And I remember, being, whether it be on the docks in Jersey City, you have a great view of the World Trade Center. If you go running through, I will ride my bike through Liberty State Park and go jogging through there. You had a great view of the World Trade Center. And when the World Trade Center was destroyed, people stood either in Jersey City or in Staten Island, and they watched the World Trade Center burning. All of southern Manhattan, lower Manhattan seemed to be on fire. And some people say that imagery comes right out of the book of Revelation when it says, verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth her merchandise anymore. New York City, maybe arguably the most important city in the world. Wall Street is located in southern lower Manhattan. Some people say trade and commerce, the Hudson River and the East River connect together to create New York Harbor, and ships coming from all over the world to dock right there in lower Manhattan. So some people said that proves that Revelation 18 is referring to New York City. So is Mystery Babylon really New York City in disguise, or is it the greater United States of America? There's an argument to be made about America being, not just the most blessed country in the history of the world, but maybe the most wicked country in the history of the world, because remember, the Puritans were biblical Christians that came over and founded the United States of America when they came over as settlers, but then the Freemasons came shortly thereafter. And there's an argument to be made, and A guy by the name of Christian Pinto did an excellent documentary, and that documentary talks about the secret mysteries of America's beginning. This is maybe one of the best documentaries I've seen. This is a two-part series. Part one, Secret Mysteries of America's Beginnings, makes the argument that Washington, D.C. is an occultic temple shrine, and that the Freemasonic imagery relates back to the religion of Freemasonry, which again we're going to look at in coming days, and that America is the Freemasonic sort of new Atlantis that was written about. Remember, Plato wrote in the Critias about the city of Atlantis, which was his super city, and some people say it was characterized by some as some type of mythological writing, sort of the way Homer did with the Iliad and the Odyssey. But others say what Homer wrote about in the Iliad and the Odyssey was just merely a dramatized version of something that actually occurred. That warriors in Sparta and Greece went to war with warriors in Troy, and there were Nephilim supermen. Homer wrote about Achilles and Hector, these Nephilim supermen that were fighting one another in this war. And some people say that there was some historical truth to what became a retelling that became a legendary story. And some say the same is true about Plato's writing, the Critias, that talks about the city of Atlantis and the Atlantean world that existed. And some would say that really did exist prior to the flood, and that's why God destroyed the world with the worldwide flood of Noah, because these Nephilim supermen from Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 had populated Earth and created their own occultic super city, and they ruled over the people of the planet Earth. And that Atlantis was a real place, and the reason why it's depicted now as being the city under the sea is because it was destroyed by what? The worldwide flood of Noah in Genesis chapters 6 through 10. You can read about that. And again, we're off track a little bit, but again, Revelation chapter 18 makes reference to this city being this great place of all the merchants, and when it was finally burning, the merchants could see her burning. That sounds like a literal place. And the merchants were mourning over her in verse 11 because no one buys her merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold and silver and stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, wood, vessels of ivory, brass, iron, and marble, cinnamon, odors, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and slaves, and the souls of men. Wow, it says a lot about this Babylonian system or Babylonian city that is actually literally burning in Revelation chapter 18. And then in verse 15 it says, "And the merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing." And that was sort of the, God bless you, man, good to see you. All right. And that was the verse that was shared in a number of commentaries when they showed the pictures of the World Trade Center being burned. That verse was probably the one that was shown the most when people tried to make the argument that New York City is the Babylon of Revelation 18, because people stood afar off in Staten Island and Jersey City watching Lower Manhattan burning and the World Trade Center towers, basically collapsing into the earth. Verse 16, "And saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls." But that's referring back to Revelation 17's Mystery Babylon system, which Dave Hunt again and Alexander Hislop have made the argument that it's the Catholic Church, which one of those guys is right. And it says, "For in 1 hour such great riches has come to naught, for every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and they cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas." God bless you, man. God bless, man. Thank you so much for that comment. God, it says, it's good. That's why we come out and do our teachings in open air, where Paul did in Mars Hill. We're doing here in South Beach and Memorial Day weekend. All these people coming from really all over the country for this annual Memorial Day festival that starts about 11 o'clock. So I gotta get moving before the jets get here, because you won't be able to hear a word I'm saying when that happens. Then you can watch the rest of that on Fox News Live from 11 to 4 today and tomorrow. But anyway, the point is, this must be a city, because it says For in 1 hour so great riches come to naught. Every shipmaster and all the company of ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is likened to this great city? Alas, alas, the great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour she is made desolate. Wow, it says, Rejoice over her, thou in heaven, ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. Interesting. And then in verse 21, it says, And a mighty angel took up a stone, a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down. Again, here it's referring to what sounds like a literal geographical city. Shall be thrown down and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of the harpers and the musicians, pipers, trumpeters shall be heard no more in thee at all. And it goes on to say that, you know, this city was seduced by her, and it says, The light of the candle shall shine in thee no more, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more in thee at all. Again, that sounds like a geographical city. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all the nations deceived, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints, and all that were slain upon the earth. Now that can't be talking about ancient Babylon, and we're going to jump through the Bible and go through that. And so with our little trusty dusty Bible prophecy mapping I brought, here is a map of the Middle East. And so here is modern or ancient Israel, which was called Canaan back then. Here's the city of Jerusalem. This is the Arabian desert, or Arabia. Back prior to the birth of Christ, these are the names: Mesopotamia, Assyria, Babylonia. Babylonia was founded by Nimrod. Nimrod was the grandson of Shem, and so of Cush rather, of Ham. And so here we have the Euphrates River, and right here on the Euphrates River is this actual city of Babylon, which was the capital of Babylonia, which was this larger area. So the capital city, like Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. Miami Beach is located in the state of Florida. And so Babylon was in Babylonia. So Babylonia, Assyria, both were founded by this individual, this Superman, Nimrod, and his legendary wife, Semiramis, who became known as the Queen of Heaven, who is referred to, the Queen of Heaven is referred to in the book of Revelation. So modern day, here we have, it's, you know, the names have been changed, but the song remains the same. So now what we have is the land of Israel. There's Jerusalem, there's Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and here is that same city of Babylon. That is actually in existence to this day. So Babylon is right here, still on the Euphrates River. So here it is in ancient pre-Christian times before the birth of Christ, and here it is today. So you see some of these same characters are here. So you have Turkey, Iran, and back then it was referred to as Media. And then remember, the Medians were basically conquered and coalesced together with the Persians and the Media-Persian Empire. Here's Persia, here's Media. Media-Persian Empire united together. Today that's referred to as Iran. What was in the Bible, Media-Persia, is modern-day Iran. But Iran was Persia up until 1938, when they changed their name to Iran. So we have an actual literal city that was built by Nimrod, who was the grandson of Noah. And so let's go ahead and take a look and see. And again, if you're going to look at a documentary, man, The Secret Mysteries of America's Beginnings, that gives you a lot of insight into why some people believe that the whole Mystery Babylon thing is really a reference to the United States of America. But let's go ahead and take a look. I told you that we were going to start all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. Of course, that is the legendary chapter that makes reference to what? The fall of man. And it says, verse 1, Genesis chapter 3, Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit that is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest ye die. Verse 4, and here we go. It says, and the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And what happens now? He has seduced Eve, and she has believed the lie of the serpent. God lied to my husband Adam, and he lied to me. I can become a god. And so it goes on to say in verse 4, reacts by this. It says, verse 4, and the serpent said to the woman, ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day that ye shall eat thereof, your eyes shall be opened, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Verse 6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and was a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So what we find then is that Eve became the first, you could argue, the first Wiccan. Wicca is the religion of witchcraft, but they don't call themselves witches necessarily in England. Actually, the #1 fastest growing religion in the United Kingdom isn't Christianity anymore, and it isn't Islam. Islam is closing in, but it has been for the last 20 years Wicca, which is the nature worship that worships the Queen of Heaven under a different name. They call her Mother Nature. They call her the goddess. They call her Gaia. And so a covens of women, and men can join these covens, but the woman is always superior because she is the fertility goddess. And they worship. God bless you guys. Amen. Enjoy your weekend. And so what we find out then is that in England, Wicca is the most powerful religion. Islam is a close second, is going to soon surpass it. But Wicca is the covens of women coming together to worship nature and Mother Nature, and believing that the deity of the female, the goddess worship system, by taking or partaking of occultic or hidden knowledge, that is exactly what Eve did. Eve is literally the first witch. She's the first Wiccan. She's the first woman who decided to pursue goddesshood by partaking of occultic, that is to say, knowledge that is hidden. That's what the word occult means hidden. And so we see that happening in the garden, and then she gave it to her husband. Remember, it says in the New Testament, Adam wasn't deceived. Eve was the one deceived. She seduced him with her power. You know, she loved him and he loved her. And when he saw her fall, he decided, well, I'm going down with the ship. I'm the captain of the ship, and she's my first mate, and I'm going down with her. And that's exactly what happened. And so the fall occurred, and the tragedy is that, you know, God had to judge the whore. But when he came down and judged, it's interesting. He called Adam out first and said, did you eat of the tree of the knowledge? And Adam blamed the woman. And God's judgment was this. He says in verse 15, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, talking to the serpent who is Satan, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his head. But unto the woman he says this in verse 16, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow in thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children. That means that childbirth wasn't supposed to be painful for women. But as punishment for her seducing her husband into the fall, now women experience, because all women are the daughters of Eve, they experience pain in childbirth as a reminder of God's displeasure of what Eve did. And then he goes on to say, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. In the Hebrew, when you look at that, I thought it meant that, you know, God would make girls find men, you know, romantically, sexually attractive so they would have kids together or something like that. No, they already were attracted to one another. What he's saying in the Hebrew is that your desire will be to rule over and usurp the authority of the man. Feminism is born right here in the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 3. So you have what? You've got the tower, you know, you've got witchcraft, the theory of evolution, as we've talked about before, where men can get better and better and better over time and become a god. That's the theory of evolution. And again, you have feminism being born right here in goddess worship, right here in Genesis chapter 3. And so we go ahead and jump forward a little bit. And again, goddess worship is part and parcel of the whole Mystery Babylon system. When we get to Genesis chapter 11, we find out that the flood has already occurred. Genesis 6, we've already talked about before in times past. fallen angels came down pre-flood, saw women, that they were beautiful. They didn't have anything like a woman in heaven. They'd never seen a female before. And so they took on the bodies of men and married these women and had children with them. That's what Homer's writing about in the Iliad and the Odyssey. These Nephilim, in the Bible they're referred to as Nephilim, but Homer referred to these men as heroes. These were the mighty men of the Trojan and Grecian armies, like Hector and Achilles and Ajax. And these individuals became the stories of legends. Hercules in Scandinavian mythology, Thor, part human, part angel, or part Scandinavian sky god, coming down and breeding with humans. And that's what the Grecian pantheon of gods is all about, the Norse pantheon of gods. That's what the Iliad and the Odyssey is all about. And so we see that there may be, in fact, some nucleus of historical truth to these legends. So by the time the flood occurs, because God had to get rid of these supermen who had created this whole Atlantean, Nephilim, demigod kingdoms here on the earth that was ruling over and threatening to breed out of existence humankind, God got rid of all of that by sinking this Atlantean Nephilim kingdom beneath the sea. That's why Atlantis is now the city beneath the sea, legends tells us, because of the worldwide flood of Noah was a real thing that really occurred, Genesis 6 through 10. But when we get to Genesis 11, we find out after the flood, when God wanted men to spread around the world so that there wouldn't be any one king over all the people, we find out that there was a guy by the name of Nimrod, who was a descendant of Cush and Ham, which was one of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the great-grandson, I believe it is, of Noah is Nimrod. And he is the guy that became the first world emperor and instituted this whole system of goddess worship and human child sacrifice. And I was saying a little bit earlier, before I got sidetracked, that God blessed America more than any other country, but is America also one of the most sinful nations ever? Why? Because since 1973, and of course, I've mentioned in times past, I went to law school at Georgetown, I lived on Capitol Hill, I literally lived a block away from the Supreme Court building. The first appellate brief I ever filed, as like a 24-year-old, I was in the Georgetown Appellate Litigation Clinic, wrote this brief, friend of the court brief on behalf of an indigent, and I actually had to walk over, and in those days, you didn't electronically file your briefs, you did it by hand. So I walked over from my apartment, a couple blocks from the law school and a block away from the Supreme Court, and dropped it off in person. I had to go in and get a copy stamped and all of that. So, yeah, but a few years prior to that, remember that very same Supreme Court, for the most blessed and freedom-loving, and that's what we're doing here today. We're remembering American heroes that died in service to their nation and all of that. But with that freedom comes responsibility. And in 1973, that very same Supreme Court, where I filed my first ever appellate brief, made a decision called the Roe v. Wade case. And that was the case, of course, that found for the first time in the history of the planet Earth, and then certainly in the history of the United States of America, that there was a fundamental constitutional right, but only for females, only for women, to do what? To abort their babies. And so killing your baby became a constitutionally protected fundamental right. And so in constitutional dichotomy, fundamental rights are the ones that are the most sacrosanct. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's a fundamental right. And so the Supreme Court, out of whole cloth, came up with an argument that a woman killing her own baby in the womb, which we would call abortion, is a fundamentally protected right. And it never been that way in the history of America. In the 200, almost, at that time, America was 197 years old, and they never had anything like that before 1973. And overnight, America became the worldwide leader in killing babies. So if you look in the Old Testament, certainly Moloch, Milcom, Baal, Chemosh, Remphan, these were all the ancient fire gods of the pagan nations surrounding Israel. And God hated those nations for worshiping these gods by sacrificing their children to the fires of Baal, or the fires of Chemosh, or Milcom, or Baal, or to Remphan, And so what we find out then is when Israel would get themselves involved in that, God would judge Israel for joining in. And remember that verse in the Old Testament said, don't make your children pass through the fire. Israel was doing that. But if you combine together all of the human child sacrifices in the history of ancient Israel, of those surrounding nations, whether it would be those that worship Baal, Milcom, Chemosh, Remphan, Baal, combine all of them together and double it, you don't come close to the number of American babies that have been aborted in their mother's womb since 1973. We're now closing in on 100 million American babies. The United States of America is the worldwide leader in aborted babies. All the nations in the world combined together, all the nations of the world combined together, added together as one number, do not reach the numbers of babies aborted by American mothers here in the United States in a single year. So we outstrip, we don't not only have more abortions than any other nations, we have more abortions than all the other nations combined together. And that happens every year. And that has happened since 1973. Almost 100 million sacrifices to Baal and Moloch. We don't call them Baal and Moloch anymore, we call it Planned Parenthood. So remember the goddess worship thing where women's rights, you got the women's right to vote in the late 1800s, post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War. Women got the right to smoke cigarettes and vote, and then Planned Parenthood came along, and all of a sudden women had more rights than men. Men don't have a right to kill their kids under any circumstances, but a woman does if she does it when they're young enough. And so again, when you look at what has happened under the guise of reproductive health, killing a child has been restyled. That's sort of an Orwellian. Remember George Orwell in 1984? He kind of changed the language. He says, what's up is down. You call up down. You call good bad. You call bad good. You change the language and people don't know what's happening. And so what we call mass murder of babies by the way of abortion or abortifacients, we now call reproductive health and women's rights. And that sounds more benign. And America, again, is the worldwide leader in that and has been since 1973. So for that reason alone, the question is, man, a bill has been written out, and that bill is going to come due. Eventually, some have argued, America is going to have to pay back and get paid back by God for what America has done to her children, which far outstrips anything Baal did, or Chemosh, or Milcom, or any of those Old Testament fire gods that God hated so much. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of wickedness. Is he going to let America continue to get away with what we've been doing? Even since Roe v. Wade was scaled back a little bit in 2000 and what was it, 21 was it? Summer of 2021 when they scaled it back a little bit. It hasn't changed much. And so the argument might, God bless you, man.
God bless you, Jesus is King.
All right, man. Say hello to our people out there in YouTube land.
Good morning.
God bless. Happy Memorial Day, brother.
See you, brother.
Yes, sir.
God bless you.
God bless, man. And so what we find out then is that America has got a lot to answer for, my friend. With great freedom comes great responsibility. That's a line from the Spider-Man comic books I used to read when I was a kid before I found out they were Nephilim archetypes. But anyway, okay, so I digress. With the time we have left, let's go ahead and jump ahead. So, Genesis chapter 11, and the whole earth was one language and of one speech. And then they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Remember, God had ordered Adam and Eve to leave the garden, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the whole earth with little people. You know, human beings are the most unique creatures in all of the universe because we're the only creatures in the universe created in the image of the living God. And so, then, for men to come together and create one big super kingdom is against the will of God, who said, go out, you know, be fruitful, spread around the world. And so, it says then, verse 5, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this that they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Remember that God kicked them, Adam and Eve, out of the Garden of Eden, lest they take hold of the tree of life and live forever in that fallen state. God said, oh man, if they unite together as one, the wickedness that they're doing, there'll be no limits to the evil they could do, united together under one wicked king. Satan would only have to compromise one person, just like he did with Eve. and he'd have the whole world in his hand. So then, verse 7, it says, go to, let us go down, and there confound the language. And there is another archetype or a hidden message showing you that the Trinity is really biblical. Even in the Old Testament, the Trinity is there. God is talking to himself. He's not saying to the angels, let's go together and do this. He's saying, go to. God bless you, man.
God bless you, bro.
Thank you, man. Thank you, man. Happy Memorial Day to you.
Too, man.
God
You
bless.
too, man.
Here's a gospel tract for you.
Yep.
All right, man.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, man. God bless. And so here, God the Father is talking to God the Son. And he says, go to, let us go down, and there confound the language, that there may not understand one another's speech. And the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. And therefore is the name of it called Babel, because there the Lord did confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon all the earth.